Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're doing a deep dive today
Oh, yeah.
into the sovereign individual.
Okay.
This is a book by James Dale Davidson and Lord William Rees-Mogg
Right.
that has been generating a lot of buzz lately. And, this book was published way back in 1997,
Wow.
but it's making a resurgence
Mm-hmm.
as some of his predictions about the information age are starting to look pretty spot on.
Yeah, it really is quite incredible how much they got right.
Like they were ahead of their time.
Yeah, well, they were writing about the internet's impact on
Yeah.
society when it was still in its early stages.
Yeah, like just babies taking their first steps.
Exactly. They saw the seeds of massive change, though, arguing that the information age would completely reshape the relationship
Okay.
between individuals and governments.
So they predicted the rise of the sovereign individual.
Yes.
Someone who can operate outside the traditional constraints
Right.
of nation states,
Mm-hmm.
leveraging technology for autonomy and wealth. Almost like a digital nomad, but on a whole other level.
That's the core concept.
Okay.
Imagine someone who can live, work, and earn wherever they choose without being bound by the rules and regulations of any particular country.
That sounds pretty utopian.
It does.
But how does that work in practice? Don't we still need governments for things like security and infrastructure?
That's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
The authors argue that the information age is fundamentally shifting the balance of power.
Okay.
They highlight what they call the declining returns to violence, meaning that as information becomes more valuable than physical resources, the ability to control people through force becomes less effective.
So are they saying nation states are going to disappear completely?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
but they predict a significant decline in their power and influence.
Interesting.
They draw parallels to historical megapolitical transitions, like the shift from feudalism to the modern nation state. Just as feudal lords lost their grip on power, they suggest that nation states will face similar challenges as technology empowers individuals.
So you're saying that our reliance on the internet is kind of like the stirrup?
In a way, yes. It's a technological advancement that shifts the balance of power.
Gotcha.
It's not a perfect analogy, of course, but it helps to illustrate the point.
They also talk about some pretty significant economic consequences.
They do. Like a massive depression is one of their predictions.
Okay, so a complete economic collapse.
Yeah. They argue that the shift to an information-based economy will be disruptive. They predict widespread job displacement and economic instability as traditional industries struggle to adapt.
They're not sugarcoating it.
No, they're not.
So what do they compare this to?
They compare it to the transition from agricultural to industrial economies, which also led to periods of unrest and hardship.
It's interesting they talk about the Y2K bug.
Yeah.
Remember all the fear
Oh, yeah.
about computers crashing and chaos? They actually saw it as a potential catalyst
They did.
for the transition to the information age.
They saw it as a perfect example of how reliant we had become on technology and how that reliance created vulnerability.
So our dependence is also our weakness.
Their point was that this vulnerability, combined with the rapid pace of technological change, would inevitably lead to a shift in power dynamics.
It's crazy to think they were making these predictions
I know.
when the internet was still in its infancy.
It really is incredible.
They were already talking about things like cybercrime, digital currencies, and the decline of traditional media, which are all major issues today.
And they were met with a lot of skepticism at the time.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Like they were laughed at.
Pretty much. The Wall Street Journal even called their analysis the nattering of your dopey aunt.
Well, whoever that aunt is, she seems to have had a pretty good grasp on the future.
She sure did.
One thing I found particularly interesting was their discussion of the 4 key markers of megapolitical transitions.
These markers are crucial for understanding how and why these massive shifts happen.
Okay, so what are those 4 markers?
The first marker they highlight is declining real incomes,
Okay.
often caused by a phenomenon they call marginalized resources.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there.
Sure.
Can you explain what they mean by marginalized resources?
Essentially, they argue that as societies exhaust their readily available resources, they become vulnerable to crises.
Okay.
They point to the strain on consumer credit markets today as a potential example of this happening in our time.
So the things that used to drive economic growth and prosperity become less accessible or less effective,
Exactly.
putting a strain on the system.
Precisely.
And that leads to their second marker.
Yes, the emergence of taboos against questioning the existing system.
So people just accept things as they are.
They do, because they become so reliant on the current structure, even as it starts to crumble, that any criticism is seen as dangerous or heretical.
It's like we're blinded by the familiar.
Yes.
Even when it's no longer working for us.
Exactly.
What's next? What's their third marker?
The rise of cultural revolutions and clashes between old and new values.
So like the classic battle between generations.
In a way, yes. As new ways of thinking and living emerge, they inevitably conflict with traditional norms and beliefs, leading to tension and upheaval.
We see this playing out today.
Absolutely.
In so many areas.
Everywhere.
From debates about social media to the fight against climate change.
It's like the old and the new are battling it out
Right.
for dominance, and it's playing out on a global stage.
So what's the final marker?
The fourth marker, and perhaps the most unsettling, is the unexpected nature of these mega-political shifts.
Oh, so we can't predict them?
Not really. The authors argue that these transitions rarely happen in a predictable or linear fashion. They tend to be abrupt and unpredictable, often catching people off guard.
So even if we see the signs, we can't really predict when or how the big shift will occur.
That's what makes it both exciting and a little terrifying.
Right.
It's a reminder that we're not in control of these historical forces.
But we can choose how we respond to them.
Right.
Okay, so they lay out these 4 markers of mega-political transitions.
Right.
Do they give any specific historical examples to illustrate their point?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like what?
Well, one that really struck me was the emergence of Osama bin Laden as a non-state threat.
Oh, wow. And they wrote this years before 9/11.
They did. But they were already seeing how individuals could wield significant power outside traditional structures.
Yeah, it's a chilling example, especially given what happened later.
It really underscores how the information age can empower individuals for better or for worse.
And it connects back to their point about the declining returns to violence.
Precisely.
Yeah.
As technology allows individuals to operate more independently and access resources more easily, traditional power structures become less effective.
So our reliance on technology is also our vulnerability, but also our path to freedom.
It's a complex dynamic, for sure.
What other historical examples do they give?
Well, another parallel they draw is to the feudal revolution.
Okay, how does that connect to the rise of the sovereign individual?
They see the feudal revolution as a prime example of how technological advancements can drive massive societal changes.
So they're saying technology can reshape the fabric of society.
Exactly. And they emphasize that these shifts are rarely smooth or peaceful.
Right, like even the transition to feudalism.
Exactly. It was marked by conflict and upheaval.
So we should expect the same as we move into the information age.
It's a possibility for sure.
They spend a good chunk of the book discussing the 4 stages of economic life.
They do.
Starting with hunter-gatherers societies.
Yeah, it's right. They argue that this stage was characterized by small nomadic groups that relied on foraging and hunting for survival.
So very base.
Violence was limited in scope.
Right.
And primarily focused on immediate needs like food and territory.
Okay, so then what comes next?
Then came agricultural societies.
Right.
The development of agriculture allowed for larger, more settled populations, which in turn led to more complex social structures and specialized roles.
Interesting.
Violence became more organized and was often used to control land resources and labor.
And then came the Industrial Revolution.
Yes, the era of industrial societies, which is where we've been for the past couple of centuries.
Right, so what are those characterized by?
Industrial societies are defined by mass production urbanization and the rise of large-scale institutions.
Got it.
While violence still existed, it became even more centralized, controlled by nation-states wielding power through armies, police forces, and advanced weaponry.
Okay, and now they argue we're on the brink of a new stage. Information societies.
Precisely. And this is where things get truly fascinating.
Okay, I'm ready.
The authors suggest that information societies will be characterized by decentralization, individual empowerment, and the declining importance of physical resources and force.
Wow.
This shift, they argue, will have a profound impact on everything from economics and politics to warfare and social organization.
Okay, so we've laid out the foundation of their argument. The 4 stages of economic life, the 4 markers of mega-political transitions, and some compelling historical examples.
We've seen how they believe technology is shifting the balance of power and how this shift could lead to the rise of the sovereign individual.
But what does this all mean for us? For the individual trying to navigate this changing world, Where do we fit into this grand narrative?
That's a great question,
Yeah.
and one that I think we should explore further.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were painting this picture of a future where technology empowers individuals, diminishes the power of nation-states, and leads to some pretty dramatic shifts in economics and society.
Yeah, we were getting into some deep stuff there.
Definitely.
And the big question we left hanging was,
Yeah.
what does this all mean for us?
Yeah.
How do we...
As individuals,
Yeah,
navigate this changing world
exactly.
and maybe even thrive in the emerging information age.
Well, the authors have some interesting ideas about that.
Okay, listening.
They argue that to succeed in this new world, we need to develop what they call sovereign thinking.
Sovereign thinking, so like a new way of looking at the world.
It is. This means embracing autonomy,
Okay.
taking responsibility for our own lives, and becoming less reliant on traditional institutions and structures.
So it's not just about what we think, but how we think.
Right.
It's about shifting our mindset from one of dependence to one of self-reliance.
Exactly. They believe that the sovereign individuals of the future will be adaptable, able to learn new skills, and create value in this evolving landscape.
So we have to be flexible and ready to learn new things.
Yes, constantly learning new things.
Makes sense.
They'll be comfortable operating in a decentralized world, leveraging technology to connect with others and build their own networks of support.
We talked about those mega-political transitions.
Yeah.
These huge shifts that happen over time.
Right.
Those don't just happen overnight, right?
No, they don't.
I'm thinking back to those 4 key markers they discussed.
Right. These transitions can be messy and unpredictable.
Okay.
The authors point out that declining real incomes often act as a catalyst, like we're seeing now with many people feeling the economic strain. Could this be a sign of a bigger shift already in motion?
It's possible, isn't it?
It's definitely something to consider.
They also talked about how these transitions often come with cultural clashes as old values and beliefs bump up against new ways of thinking.
Oh, absolutely.
We see this happening all around us today.
All the time.
Yeah.
The rise of social media, the debates over climate change, the questioning of traditional institutions, these are all examples of this cultural friction.
Right. And it can get pretty heated sometimes.
It can. And the authors suggest that to navigate these transitions successfully, we need to be open to new ideas, challenge our own assumptions, and engage in constructive dialogue, even with those who hold different views.
That's tall order.
It is, but it's essential if we want to build a better future.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. But let's be honest, not everyone is going to embrace this whole sovereign individual idea, right?
Probably not.
Some might find it threatening
For sure.
or even dangerous.
Yeah, the authors actually address this in the book.
Okay, so what do they say?
They acknowledge there will be resistance to these changes, especially from those who benefit from the existing power structures.
That's understandable. People don't like to give up power.
Exactly. They even predict that governments will try to hold on to their power using their control over things like currency and regulations.
So are they saying we're headed for some kind of showdown
Well,
between these sovereign individuals and the state?
yeah.
It sounds a bit like an action movie.
Not necessarily. They suggest the transition to the information age is more likely to be a gradual erosion of state power rather than a sudden collapse. They envision a future where individuals have more choices and freedom, and governments have to compete for citizens and businesses rather than forcing their control.
So it's less about overthrowing the system
Right.
and more about creating alternative systems that better align with the values and possibilities of this new world.
Exactly. The authors believe that the future belongs to those who can adapt to this new reality and develop the skills and mindset to thrive in a more decentralized and individualistic world.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges and opportunities, but let's get down to brass tacks. What are some practical steps individuals can take to become more sovereign in this emerging world? What kind of advice do the authors offer?
They provide a range of recommendations.
Okay.
Here are a few key takeaways. First, they emphasize financial independence.
Financial independence. So like not being reliant on a single job.
That means developing multiple streams of income, diversifying assets, and reducing reliance on traditional employment. Remember, they predicted this shift would lead to job displacement.
Right.
So having diverse income is crucial.
Yeah, that's solid advice for anyone, no matter what the future holds. What else?
Second, they encourage geographical mobility, being willing to relocate to places with more opportunities, lower taxes, or better quality of life. With remote work and digital nomadism becoming more common, it's easier to live and work wherever you choose.
They even predicted that governments would start competing for citizens.
They did.
That's a big change from how things work now. What's the third piece of advice?
Third, they stress the importance of continuous learning and skill development. The rapid pace of technological change means the skills valuable today might be obsolete tomorrow. Staying ahead of the curve by continually investing in your education and development is essential.
Yeah, I think about that a lot.
It's important.
It's not enough to learn one skill and stick with it for your whole career anymore. You have to be adaptable and a lifelong learner.
Exactly. And the authors see this as a good thing. They believe the information age will create more opportunities for individuals to pursue their passions, develop their talents, and create their own unique paths to success.
That sounds pretty exciting. But let's be real. There are also going to be some downsides to this transition. The authors themselves predict a major economic depression. That's not exactly something to look forward to.
You're right. They're very clear that this transition will be challenging. They predict economic disruption, social unrest, and even violence as the old order crumbles and a new one emerges.
So how do they suggest we prepare for these challenges?
They offer a few key pieces of advice. First, develop strong communities and support networks. As traditional institutions weaken, having strong social connections and being part of a community that can provide mutual aid will become even more important.
Makes sense. If you're going to be more self-reliant, it helps to have people you can rely on.
Exactly. Second, they encourage individuals to become more resilient and adaptable. In a world of rapid change and uncertainty, it's essential to be able to bounce back from setbacks, adjust to new circumstances, and find creative solutions to unexpected problems.
That's a valuable skill set no matter what, but especially in a world that's constantly changing.
Absolutely. And third, they urge us to adopt a long-term perspective. While the transition might be bumpy in the short term, they believe it ultimately holds the potential for greater freedom, prosperity, and opportunity for those who are willing to embrace it.
So they're saying to focus on the bigger picture, see the potential amidst the disruption.
Exactly. They believe the information age represents a fundamental shift in the balance of power, one that will ultimately empower individuals and create a more equitable and prosperous world.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential benefits and challenges of this transition, and we've explored some practical steps individuals can take to prepare. But what about the bigger picture? What do the authors think will happen to things like government economics and warfare in this new world?
That's a great question, and one I think we should delve into.
Okay, so we're back, and we've talked about how the sovereign individual sees this shift toward individual power, like impacting us on a personal level. But what about like governments and economies and even war? How do those massive systems that shape our world,
Right.
how do they change in this new landscape?
Well, the authors spend a lot of time thinking about this.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily predict that governments are going to disappear completely.
Right.
But they think they will transform
Mm-hmm.
and that there will be a big shift in the balance of power.
Okay, so what do they think will happen?
They kind of envision nation states becoming less all-powerful rulers and more like service providers.
Just providers.
Yeah, they have to compete for citizens and businesses.
So instead of being stuck with the government we're born into, we get to choose.
Exactly. You choose your phone plan
Right.
or your internet provider.
But with way higher stakes.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So they're saying that we'll have the freedom to choose where we want to live and work and pay taxes based on what we get in return.
Right, what services and
Right.
benefits we want.
So if a government isn't providing what I need, I can just go somewhere else.
Pretty much.
But-
They suggest that this competition could actually lead to more efficient and responsive governance.
Okay, that's interesting. But what about all those things that governments do that we rely on? Like social safety nets and roads and bridges and the military. What happens to all that in this hyper-individualistic world?
Well, that's a question a lot of people have, and the authors acknowledge that it's a valid concern.
Yeah.
They suggest that in a world of sovereign individuals,
Yeah.
these services might be provided through a combination of private initiatives and voluntary associations, and maybe even some form of limited government
Gotcha.
that's focused on those essential functions.
So it's not like going back to the Stone Age.
No, not at all.
It's more like we have to find new ways to take care of each other.
Exactly. They believe technology will play a key role in facilitating these new models of service provision, allowing individuals to connect with each other, pool resources, and create solutions tailored to their specific needs.
So it's about using technology to empower us to solve problems and build a better future.
That's the idea.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the economic implications. The authors predict a major economic depression as part of this mega political transition.
Right.
Why do they think that's inevitable? And what does it mean for how we think about work and wealth creation in this new world?
Well, they argue that the shift to an information-based economy is going to be disruptive.
Okay.
Just like the transition from agricultural to industrial economies was.
Yeah, we talked about that before.
They predict that, like, old industries will be upended and jobs will be lost and there will be significant economic instability as we adapt.
So it's not going to be a smooth ride.
Definitely not. They even predicted the decline of traditional media and the rise of new forms of communication like the internet.
And they were right about that?
Yeah, they were remarkably accurate.
So if they're right about the economic depression, what can we do to prepare?
Well, they emphasize the importance of becoming less reliant on traditional employment models and more focused on creating value in this emerging information economy.
So, like becoming more entrepreneurial.
Right. They talk about developing multiple streams of income,
Okay.
diversifying assets, and being adaptable to changing market demands.
So we have to be flexible and creative and resilient.
Exactly.
So it's not just about working harder.
It's about working smarter.
Okay, we've covered governments and economics. Let's wrap up with a discussion about warfare.
Right.
Because, as we all know, war has been a constant throughout history.
It has.
So how do the authors see the nature of conflict changing in this information age?
They argue that the information age will actually lead to a decline.
A decline.
Yeah, in the effectiveness of violence.
So they think wars will be less violent.
It's not that simple.
Yeah.
They're saying that in the information age, information is the real source of power.
Oh, okay. So brute force becomes less effective.
Exactly. They suggest that traditional armies and weapons will become less relevant, while cyber warfare, information manipulation, and economic disruption will become the new battlegrounds.
So it's like a whole new kind of warfare.
It is, and it's already happening. We're seeing it with things like election interference and hacking.
And all that stuff we hear about in the news.
Exactly. And they predict that this shift will make warfare more decentralized and less predictable.
So it's harder to know who the enemy is.
In a way, yes. Think about the rise of non-state actors like terrorist organizations and even lone wolf attackers.
Scary to think about.
It is. They can inflict significant damage without relying on traditional military structures.
So what's the future of warfare going to look like? Is it just going to be constant cyber attacks and propaganda?
Well, they don't necessarily paint a completely bleak picture.
Okay.
They also see potential for new forms of conflict resolution and peacemaking.
Right.
They believe the internet and other communication technologies can actually be used to build bridges between cultures, foster understanding, and create new avenues for diplomacy and cooperation.
So technology is like a double-edged sword.
It is. It can be a weapon, but it can also be a tool for peace.
And ultimately, it's up to us to decide how we use it.
Right. The authors believe that the ultimate outcome of the information age will depend on the choices we make, both as individuals and as a global society.
So it's not just about technology.
No.
It's about how we choose to use it.
Exactly. Do we use these powerful tools to sow division and conflict, or to build a more just equitable and peaceful world?
This has been an incredible deep dive.
It has been fascinating.
The sovereign individual, even though it was written decades ago, feels so incredibly relevant to the world we're living in right now.
It really does. It's a testament to the author's foresight and their willingness to challenge conventional wisdom. Their insights will likely become even more valuable as we move further into the information age.
So if you're looking for a book that will make you think and question your assumptions, and maybe even inspire you to take control of your destiny in this rapidly changing world, I highly recommend checking out The Sovereign Individual.
It's a great read.
And as you read it, ask yourself, what role will I play in shaping the future? Because ultimately, the future is not something that happens to us.
Right.
It's something we create together.
I love that.
Well, that's a perfect note to end on.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into The Sovereign Individual.
It's been my pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.